Imagine living with someone for years, sharing every moment, and having no idea they have another life hidden from you. It's the ultimate betrayal. A secret family, a secret life, and a husband who's been lying in plain sight. But how do people live like this, and what drives them to keep their darkest secrets hidden? As they walked hand in hand through the park on crisp autumn mornings, the sun casting a warm glow over their faces, no one would have guessed that beneath this idyllic facade lay a secret so devastating it would shatter everything. To outsiders, John and Emily's marriage was the epitome of perfection. They were young, in love, and building a life together. They shared laughter-filled conversations, intimate moments, and family vacations to picturesque destinations. But what people saw on the surface was only a fraction of the truth. Behind closed doors, their relationship was a carefully constructed illusion. Emily would often catch John staring off into space, his expression distant, but whenever she confronted him about it, he'd brush it off as mere exhaustion or stress from work. She began to notice tiny inconsistencies in his stories. A missed phone call here, an unexplained trip there, but her trust in him was unwavering. Little did she know, the perfect facade they presented to the world would soon crumble, revealing a dark reality that would leave her questioning everything. Their life together was like something out of a fairy tale. They had met in college, fell deeply in love, and built a beautiful home in the suburbs. He was her rock, her partner in every sense of the word. They spent their weekends hiking, trying new restaurants, and just enjoying each other's company. She thought they were building a life together, but little did she know, he had been living a lie. They had big plans, to start a family, travel the world, and grow old together. But amidst all the laughter and love, there were moments of tension, of frustration, that she brushed off as normal marriage ups and downs. She thought they were working through it, but in hindsight she realizes now that he was already elsewhere. The red flags were there, but she chose to ignore them, blinded by her love for him. They would get into fights over trivial things, who left the dishes in the sink, whose turn it was to take out the trash. But he'd always make up for it with a romantic gesture, a surprise getaway, or a heartfelt apology. She thought that's what love was all about, making up for each other's flaws. As the months went by, Sarah started to notice little things that didn't add up. Like how her husband would suddenly get quiet when she asked about his family, or how he'd quickly change the subject when she brought up his childhood. At first, she brushed it off as just being private, but the inconsistencies kept piling up. He'd promised to call his parents for their anniversary, only to forget. And then there were the mysterious phone calls, a faint whispering on the other end that he'd swiftly silence. One time, Sarah caught him staring at an old photo album in their attic, a look of unease on his face. She thought maybe it was just nostalgia, but as she watched him quickly close the book and usher her away, she felt a shiver run down her spine. What's going on? She'd ask herself, but he'd reassure her everything was fine, that they were just being silly. It started with little things. A faint unease in her gut when he'd make excuses to leave the house on weekends. A missed phone call from a number she didn't recognize, which he quickly brushed off as just work. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but a nagging doubt began to creep in, like a slow-burning flame that refused to be extinguished. As the days went by, Sarah's curiosity turned into a full-blown obsession. She couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off about her husband's past. So, she started digging, scouring every inch of their lives together. She began with his social media profiles, but he was extremely private online. No posts from 5 years ago, no old photos with anyone who wasn't family. It was as if he had erased himself from the digital world. Undeterred, Sarah turned her attention to his phone records and bank statements. She made a list of all the numbers and transactions she didn't recognize. A seemingly innocuous hotel charge in another state, a mysterious payment to someone named Emily. The more she uncovered, the more questions she had. Why was there an address listed for a storage unit he'd rented years ago? And what about those strange phone calls at 3 a.m. on weekdays? Sarah's mind was racing with possibilities as she sat in their darkening living room, surrounded by scattered papers and screens. She felt like a detective piecing together a puzzle, but this wasn't a mystery novel. It was her life. As she scrolled through his phone's browsing history, her eyes landed on a social media account that sent a shiver down her spine. The name was unfamiliar, but the profile picture looked eerily similar to the one he used for work. Her mind racing, she clicked on it and discovered a private account with a username that matched his birthday. She felt like she'd been punched in the gut. Why would he have a secret social media account? And what was he hiding? As she dug deeper, the web of deceit unraveled further. She discovered a fake email account, created under his name, but with a completely different profile picture, one that wasn't him. And then, there were the secret meetings. He'd been making excuses to leave town for work, claiming he had to attend conferences and training sessions. But when she started tracking his online activity, she found him checking into hotels in other states, not just once or twice but repeatedly. She felt like a detective piecing together a mystery novel. Each new revelation made her question everything they'd built together. She remembered the countless times he'd said, "I love you," and "you're my best friend," wondering if it was all just a ruse to keep her in the dark. She recalled the birthdays, anniversaries, and holidays she'd spent with him, thinking they were celebrating milestones. But what if those moments were actually part of his lies? The more she uncovered, the more she felt like an outsider looking into their marriage through a distorted lens. She couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off in her marriage. The more she dug into his past, the more inconsistencies she found. And then, like a punch to the gut, she discovered a Facebook post from what seemed like a family vacation. A photo of him holding hands with two kids who looked eerily familiar. Her heart sank as she scrolled through their social media profiles, and it all clicked into place. The kids' birthdays matched his siblings. The last names were similar, and the locations were too close to be coincidental. She felt like she'd been living in a dream, and suddenly, reality crashed down around her. The weight of his betrayal crushed her, and she felt like her whole world was turned upside down. Everything that had seemed normal, the family vacations, the weekend get-togethers with friends who just happened to be his family too, now made sense. She remembered the times he'd say, "I'm going out for a work thing," but would come back hours later, or how he'd always mention how much he loved kids, even though they didn't have any of their own. She sat across from him, her eyes burning with a mix of anger and sadness, as she demanded answers. "Tell me the truth," she spat, her voice shaking with emotion. He looked up at her, his eyes welling up with tears, but it was too late for apologies. "How could you keep this from me?" she asked, her voice cracking. He stuttered something about being lonely and needing a connection, but she cut him off, her words spilling out in a torrent of hurt and betrayal. "You always talk about how much you love kids," she reminded him, "but it wasn't just some fantasy. It was your reality with another woman." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and he faltered, unable to meet her gaze. I didn't mean for it to hurt you," he stammered. But it was too little, too late. She shook her head, her expression a mask of disgust. "You lied to me, over and over again." The room seemed to shrink around them, the only sound the heavy weight of their broken trust. She stared blankly at the walls that had once held laughter and warmth. Now they felt like a prison, a constant reminder of his betrayal. The anger she'd been trying to suppress began to boil over, a toxic mix of emotions that threatened to consume her. "How could you do this to me?" she screamed, the words echoing off the walls as tears streamed down her face. She thought back to all the times they'd laughed together, the memories now tainted by his secret life. She felt like she was living in a nightmare, unable to wake up from the horrors of that truth. The thought of him with another woman, raising children who were not hers, was almost too much to bear. She wondered how many lies he'd told, how many times he'd made love to her, while his other family grew. The weight of it all crushed her, leaving her gasping for air in a sea of grief and shame. As she stood there, holding the shattered remains of her life, Sarah realized she had to let go. The marriage was over, but a part of her had been trapped in that toxic relationship for far too long. Rebuilding wasn't just about piecing together the physical fragments. It was about rediscovering herself. She started taking art classes again, something she'd put aside years ago. As colors danced across the canvas, Sarah felt an old spark reignite within her. She began to reconnect with friends and family members she'd distanced herself from during the marriage. It wasn't easy, but slowly, a new identity emerged, one that didn't rely on her husband's validation or approval. Sarah learned to walk alone in public spaces without feeling anxious about being seen. She started cooking for herself again, savoring flavors and textures she'd once savored with her ex. These small victories built into something greater. Self-discovery. She found strength in her own voice, in the quiet moments when no one was watching, and in the realization that she was enough, even without a partner. Looking back on this experience, I realized that trust was the foundation that crumbled beneath our relationship. I remember the countless times I brushed off my intuition, telling myself he wouldn't do that, or he's just stressed. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. If I could go back, I'd communicate differently, not just about the big things, but also about the little gestures of kindness and attention that speak volumes to our love for each other. I had established boundaries earlier on, setting clear expectations for how we'd handle conflicts and disagreements. I wouldn't let the fear of abandonment hold me hostage, nor would I settle for being a silent partner in a relationship that was slowly suffocating me. It's funny, I used to think that love meant sacrificing myself for the other person. But now, I see it as something so much more beautiful. A partnership built on mutual respect and vulnerability. These lessons have stayed with me long after the divorce, guiding me towards healthier relationships where trust is earned, not assumed. And in those moments when I feel like losing myself again, I remind myself of who I am. Strong, resilient, and worthy of love, no matter what. As I slowly began to rebuild my life, I was fortunate to have an incredible support system surrounding me. My friends, Rachel and Mike, would often take me out for dinner or coffee, listening to me vent about the latest developments in our divorce proceedings. They never judged me, never asked me why I stayed as long as I did. They just listened with open hearts and minds. My sister, Emma, was also a rock for me during this time. She'd come over every week, cooking meals for me, making sure I took care of myself physically and emotionally. We'd have long conversations about everything except my husband's infidelity. She knew that topic still hurt too much. And then there were the therapy sessions with Dr. Lee. At first, I was hesitant to talk about my feelings, but she created a safe space for me to express myself without fear of judgment. With her guidance, I began to process my emotions, working through the guilt and shame I'd carried for so long. For the first time in months, I started to see a glimmer of hope on the horizon, that I was strong enough to face this new chapter in my life head on. As I stood in that empty house, the silence was deafening. The furniture we'd shared for so long, now eerily quiet, without the sound of my children's laughter or our own arguments. It was as if time had frozen, trapping me in a moment that would change everything. I remember walking into the kitchen, opening the fridge to grab a glass of water. That's when I saw it, a photo of his family, taken just months before. The smile on his face, the love in their eyes. It was like I'd been punched in the gut. How could he do this? How could he keep this from me? But something inside me snapped that day. Maybe it was the exhaustion of trying to hold everything together, or maybe it was the realization that I deserved better. Whatever it was, I knew I couldn't stay stuck in this toxic cycle any longer. The pain had become a fire that fueled my determination. I would rise above this darkness and find my way out. It wasn't easy to get here. Acceptance was a long time coming. But slowly, the weight of his betrayal began to lift. I started to see that I'd been living in a prison of my own making, trapped by the memories of what he'd done. Every smile from him, every hug, felt like a slap in the face. I couldn't trust anything anymore. But as time passed, something shifted inside me. The anger and hurt didn't disappear, but they began to lose their hold on me. I started to focus on myself, who I was outside of this toxic relationship. What did I want? Who did I want to be? It wasn't about forgiving him. It was about letting go. Letting go of the pain, the guilt, the shame. It was a process, not an event. Some days were harder than others, but with each step forward, I felt myself growing stronger. The fire that had fueled my determination, it didn't burn out, but instead transformed into a flame that lit up a new path for me. For the first time in years, I felt free to be who I was meant to be. As I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman who had finally found herself. The weight of my husband's secrets was still there, but it no longer defined me. I started to see that his betrayal wasn't about me. It was about him and his inability to be honest. I realized that I had been living someone else's dream, trying to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. As I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized the person staring back at me. The woman who had been married for over a decade with 2 kids and a comfortable life was gone. In her place was someone raw, vulnerable, and searching for answers. It took time, but I slowly began to rebuild my life. I started by setting new boundaries, not just with him, but with myself too. I stopped checking his phone, stopped asking about his whereabouts, and stopped trying to be the perfect wife. I rediscovered myself in the process of healing. I started taking art classes, joined a book club, and even learned how to play the guitar. For the first time in years, I felt like me again. The emptiness left by his betrayal was replaced with a sense of purpose and belonging. I found comfort in the simple things: a good cup of coffee, a beautiful sunset, or a conversation with a friend who didn't judge me. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. As I sat in therapy sessions, working through my emotions, I realized that rebuilding trust wasn't just about my husband or his actions. It was about me, too. I had to confront the fact that I had been living on autopilot, giving my entire life to him without questioning anything. The thought of being hurt again paralyzed me at times, but I knew I couldn't let fear control me. I started small, attending support groups for betrayed spouses, reading books on trust and relationships, and practicing self-care. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day, I began to see myself as a strong woman who deserved better. Rebuilding trust became about earning it from myself first. I had to forgive myself for being blind to his deception and for staying in the relationship so long. And slowly, as I worked through my own pain, I started to rebuild trust with others. Friends who didn't judge me, family members who stood by me, even my children who learned to see their father's flaws. As I navigated the aftermath of that fateful day, something unexpected happened. My desire to help others grew stronger. I realized that I wasn't alone in this pain. There were countless women out there who had been through similar betrayals, hiding their secrets and pretending everything was fine. But they weren't, and I knew it. I started attending support groups for spouses of cheaters, and the stories I heard left me speechless. Women who had been lied to for years, manipulated into believing they were crazy, or that it was their fault. I saw myself in them. The shame, the guilt, the desperation. But I also saw a glimmer of hope. I began sharing my story with these women, and something miraculous happened. They opened up to me, pouring out their hearts like I had done just months before. It was cathartic, witnessing others find solace in my experience. We formed an unspoken bond, one that only comes from walking through the darkest of times together. For the first time, I felt a sense of purpose beyond my own pain. It's been 3 years since that fateful day I discovered the truth about my husband's secret family. It feels like a lifetime ago. So much has changed since then. My divorce was finalized last year, and I've been focusing on rebuilding myself. I've started taking art classes again, something I loved but abandoned during my marriage. Now, I find solace in creating beauty from the ashes of heartbreak. I've also reconnected with old friends who were there for me during those tough times. We laugh together, share stories, and support each other's growth. And then there's Alex. He's someone I met through a mutual friend. We bonded over our shared love of hiking and good conversation. He's kind, genuine, and respects my boundaries. For the first time in years, I feel like myself again. I've learned to let go of the anger and resentment that consumed me for so long. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I'm not the same woman who walked out of that marriage. I'm stronger, wiser, and more resilient than ever before. As I reflect on that chapter of my life, I realize the lessons I've learned are invaluable. Red flags were there all along, the inconsistencies in his stories, the excuses for being away, the subtle changes in behavior. But I ignored them, choosing to believe what I wanted to believe. Trust issues crept in, and communication broke down. We became strangers living together. If only I had spoken up sooner, asked more questions, listened more intently. Perhaps things wouldn't have escalated to this point. The pain of discovery still lingers. But it's a different kind now. It's no longer about the shock and betrayal. It's about the realization that I was complicit in our demise. I enabled his behavior by turning a blind eye, by not confronting the issues head on. That's what keeps me up at night. The thought of what could have been if only we had communicated honestly, if only we had trusted each other fully. These lessons have stayed with me, guiding me in my new journey. I'm more vigilant now, more aware of the warning signs. I've learned to prioritize communication and trust in every relationship that comes into my life. As I reflect on my journey, I want to leave you with something that's been a hard-won lesson for me. You deserve to be seen, heard, and loved without condition. When I finally escaped the toxic relationship, I felt lost and alone. But I also felt liberated. It was like shedding a skin that had grown too tight. As I sit here today, reflecting on the journey that brought me to this moment, I'm reminded that the truth has a way of unraveling even the most carefully constructed lies. The secret family my husband had been hiding for so long was just one thread in the tapestry of deceit he'd woven around our marriage. But it's the threads of honesty and vulnerability that have allowed me to rebuild myself, to rediscover who I am outside of that toxic relationship. As we reflect on her journey, it's clear that finding out about her husband's secret family was just the beginning. It was a wake-up call that forced her to re-examine every aspect of their relationship and ultimately led her to make the brave decision to leave. Her story serves as a powerful reminder that trust must be earned, not assumed, and relationships require ongoing effort to maintain. By choosing herself, she's found strength in vulnerability and teaches us all the importance of self-love, boundaries, and seeking help when needed.